Well, hello, y'all. It is race week once again. So, as is tradition, we are going to talk about the Baku Grand Prix and then work our way into the upcoming race, aka the Singapore Grand Prix. And you can see why the start is always so chaotic here in Baku. It gets very bundled up. But once we get a little bit of clear space to chit chat, we'll have a little talk about what we saw in this weekend's race. Oh, everybody's going really slow here. Okay. AI doesn't know how to do that at the beginning. But let's get to the important matters of the real world F1. Red Bull starting off. Obviously, Max Verstappen was pretty much faultless throughout the weekend, on the heels of a very strong Monza victory. Now, Red Bull comes to another pretty traditionally low downforce circuit because of the long straights at the back, and had another very good showing. Now, as much as we can talk about Verstappen's Grand Slam, which, you know, his typical excellence was absolutely on display. Granted, it was probably one of his most comfortable Grand Slams because he didn't really have anybody that was particularly threatening right behind him with where the McLarens were, where the Ferraris were, and the incredible qualifying performance of Carlos Sainz. But we'll talk about that later. What I really want to point out and talk a bit about is Yuki Tsunoda, who again has looked pretty confident in the car. It's been a few races since they've brought that upgrade to bring the new floor in, and he's been performing quite well ever since that new floor was brought to the Red Bull, and Max's results have obviously taken an upturn in the same time frame. So it looks like there is definitely some movement in the right direction with that car. Now, Yuki did get held up by Liam Lawson at the end of the race there. He wasn't able to quite clear the Red Bull sister team car. Few reasons I think that there is that. I think pace is still pretty close between Yuki and the V-Carbs, just on raw pace, in spite of that car getting better to drive, at least in the hands of Yuki. But they also had Lando Norris kind of breathing at the gearbox of him. And I think that if Yuki gets by Liam, it puts Lawson kind of on the back foot. And it's most likely that once that DRS train was broken, that Lando Norris probably gets by both of them, and it costs them both points. So I think there may have been a little bit of Red Bull's sister team, let's play it a little safe and easy to get that in there. But, you know, Max is now starting to pile up quite a few wins in a row. I think he's almost won the most races of the season, if I'm not mistaken. I think he might be right about there. So it was really that middle part, but he's managed to hang around in the championship fight, and there have been a couple of untimely retirements for the McLaren duo as well now, which makes it look like, you know, Verstappen is just hanging around enough in that championship fight to keep himself mathematically in it. I mean, another retirement for each of those McLarens, and Verstappen, I think, is looking like an opportunity for a title on his own, when it really looked like it was kind of out of the picture. It's not such a wild reach anymore, with the way especially that Red Bull car is starting to look like it's getting better again. Next up, the P2 finisher, Mercedes. A very good weekend for both drivers there. Antonelli was quick throughout the weekend, en route to a top 4 finish, coming home 4th. George Russell early in the weekend was battling with some illness, and it was still definitely affecting him on Saturday and probably a bit on Sunday, but drove very well on Sunday to get himself past Carlos Sainz and into P2. So That Mercedes car, I don't know whether it's a circuit-specific thing. We'll have to wait and see. Oh, that is some huge lockups. It may be a circuit-specific thing, but it looks like that Mercedes is almost getting back to that state it was early in the season where it was quick, it was manageable to drive, and it looked like the second fastest car. That's where they really heaped up a bunch of points. Another big part of the news with this weekend, of course, is that Mercedes moved past Ferrari into second in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously, no one is catching McLaren. If they had had one of their typical weekends, they would have clinched the Constructors this week. But obviously, McLaren had a very interesting weekend and did not do that. But the Mercedes is once again looking like a drivable car. Kimi Antonelli on the other side of the garage. I know I talked about his result a bit, but you know, after the statement of Monza of he's not where we'd want him to be, he's looked pretty good. And I know that comments from Toto Wolff recently this week have said, somebody asked him about the contract status or if Kimi would be driving for him next season. And he, at least to the public, Toto Wolff said 100% that Antonelli is driving for us in 2026. Granted, there's been no announcement about his contract being signed. I think, and the prevailing thought is, most likely they are waiting to get the last details of George's contract ironed out, and then they will, you know, announce both of them together and lock in the lineup at the same time rather than, you know, announcing one signing ahead of another. Next up, we've got the two cars directly in front of us, Williams. And they are far up the list because the man in front of me right now, Carlos Sainz, had a fantastic grid position by getting out at the right time when the weather was really changing in Q3, put together a very solid qualifying result there and started on the front row. Now, granted, he ended up losing P2 to George Russell, but considering he got up so high up the grid thanks to some of the weather, the Williams looked to have decent enough pace in the hands of Carlos Sainz. Even though he fell off the back of Verstappen early, it was still, you know, right there, creating a challenge for P3 and grabbed the first full race podium for Williams since, I want to say, Baku 2017. There was the podium that George Russell got them at Spa a few years ago, but that was that race where it essentially, he qualified on the front row because of the rain. Another mixed weather, but then the race was run a couple laps under safety car and then halted. So he did get the podium result. It was a half points affair as far as, that was 2021 then. I can do math. But so, first full race podium for the Williams team. Now with Carlos Sainz grabbing that podium, you start to ask the question, what about Alex Albon? Alex didn't have as good of a weekend, and it does seem that Carlos is starting to round into form in this Williams team. I know, realistically, if you look at the qualifying comparisons between the two, Carlos has been right there with Albon. It's really been the points and race pace that's the difference, but obviously a big old 15-point haul is going to help Carlos quite significantly. But it does seem that the pendulum is swinging towards Carlos Sainz in the team lead driver comparison. That being said, the team is definitely working to move forward together, and it's a good, strong driver pairing. So I look forward to seeing that improve. They did have that kind of drop in performance in the middle of this season where things got tough for them. I mean, they came out of the gate very strong, were that best of the rest car right away. And then have struggled a bit in the mid part of the season. But overall pace-wise, the Williams look to be quite decent. I know Williams has typically had good results in power circuits. Baku is certainly a power circuit with the long run from the final corner to the line, but still decent. Alex Albon made some ground, but was essentially in the mid-pack, not really going anywhere. Next up, the car we're in now, the VCARB team. Liam Lawson, a very good drive from his perspective as well. And, you know, it seems like he's getting kind of that confidence back the last few weeks. His pace has been good. Isaac Hadjar still quite competitive, typically, with Liam Lawson. Although this time, the teammate battle swung towards Liam. That being said, Isaac did manage to get the car into the points to get a double points finish for the VCARB team, which is pretty good, and they will look to continue to bring those strong results. It doesn't look quite as good as it did in the early season. I think Williams and VCARB were kind of cream of the crop at the early part of the season. And they've both slid back a little bit, but I still think that VCARB consistently delivers a car that is manageable and drivable by its drivers, no matter where they're at in the season. So I would expect the VCARB team to be challenging for solid points for the rest of the year. They'll probably be fighting it out with the Williams team as we get to the final stages of the season. We are kind of dwindling down on race 2. You're going very defensive. Well, I can't pass here, so just gotta stay here. Once I get out of the castle session, I will advance my notes, and we'll talk about the next team, because I have forgotten who the actual next team is. And, the actual next team. The team that came in 7th place in this race, and that is a team that probably wants to forget that this weekend even happened. Definitely for one side of the garage, and even still, probably for the other side of the garage, they would wish it didn't happen as well. That, of course, is McLaren. Oscar Piastri had one of the tougher race weekends for a championship leader in quite some time. Almost a full-on implosion. I mean, crashed in Q3, had to start 10th because of that. Then, of course, had the jump start at the start of the race, which resulted in him getting off the line literally last because he had to hammer the brakes and stop moving. And then was out just a few corners into the race, crashed into the wall, and his day was done. So really, really bad day for the championship leader, the kind of thing that Max Verstappen would love to see. But on the other side of the garage, you also had Lando Norris, who did not take advantage of the qualifying mistake from Piastri, only qualified in 6th, I believe. Basically the lower parts of the top 10. But only had one car between, or no, he would have been 8th, because he only had one car between him and Oscar at least when they were lined up on the grid. So did not make, the best of the qualifying performance. And then in the race was really not quite able to make the ground that he needed to. Obviously, part of that comes from another slow pit stop from McLaren, another bad stop. Kept him from being able to jump ahead of Lawson and Tsunoda. But even still, that McLaren should have had the pace to outrace those guys before the pit stop phase. The extra time, he shouldn't have been going for like a 1 second undercut. He should have cleared them by quite a margin. So a disappointing day for the McLaren team just as a whole. It's going to be one of those things that if Oscar fails to win the championship, this will probably be one of those weekends that gets looked at like, well, here was your big missed opportunity, whether that's losing it to Norris or losing it to Verstappen. That's the big missed opportunity. On the other hand, if Oscar does win the championship and it's by a small margin to Lando Norris, it would be one of those where you look back on it on Norris's side and say, well, you had a big opportunity to pick up significant points in hand to your championship rival, and you only picked up 6. So either way, I think somebody's going to be disappointed in retrospect looking at this weekend, not optimizing it in any shape or form. And they kind of just want to put this weekend behind them, I'm sure. Where's my next set of notes? Hold on. You got to pay attention so I don't crash. So yeah, the poor performance on the weekend has definitely left a small crack of a door open to one Mr. Max Verstappen. It's not, it's not mathematically over. It's definitely, it's unlikely historically based on the point spreads. It's very unlikely in history, but it's not impossible. Next up, we've got Ferrari, who had a pretty lackluster weekend. I'll say in Q2, I think they made a huge mistake with Lewis's tire choice for the final run of Q2. I think it was pretty clear that in that condition, the medium tires were the better tire to be on. And not only did they send him out on soft tires, they sent him out on some old softs. By the time he started his flying lap that counted, there was already 5 laps on those tires. And they also didn't fuel him for one more run. They should have fueled him to, for safety if they were going to put him out there. So I think there was a big mistake there. Granted, the other hand is, well, he's just got to perform and qualify better and not leave it up to chance like that, which I agree with. But when you're struggling and then also you're not getting the best opportunities to rectify it, that makes it even tougher. I mean, we saw a driver struggling similarly, but a team doing their best to try and make the difference of it in Red Bull when Perez was really struggling to get a decent qualifying. They were giving him that extra set of tires in Q1 and Q2 to get through. They weren't just assuming he was going to make it through to Q3. They were trying to maximize it as much as they could in addition to needing the driver to step up. Leclerc, a typical Baku kind of savant, has been very good around the track historically, even in bad cars, picking up pole positions. Had a crash in Q3, so was not the good news for him either. And I think with that combination, considering where they started, I think Ferrari kind of maximized their day as the end result. Lewis made a couple of positions early on and then was able to drive to the end. Tried to chase down the next group of cars ahead, but wasn't quite able to get there, and that led to, a Ferrari gaffe in of itself in the swap of positions, trying to put the positions back at the end, because obviously the smart move, Lewis came out doing the alternate strategy, came out behind Leclerc on much fresher tires instead of making Lewis use up tires to try and take a crack at the cars ahead. I believe it was, would have been Norris. They, swapped the positions and let the fresh tires go on the attack, which is pretty normal. Their mistake, however, was when they tried to swap it back on the last lap. Then they didn't time it right, and Lewis still crossed the line ahead of Leclerc instead of giving that position back. Realistically, I don't think either of those drivers particularly cares about those 2 points in a Ferrari, that 2-point difference in a Ferrari. I think they're both unhappy to be where they're at. And Ferrari is really, they lost the position in the constructors to Mercedes. but they're also only 14 points ahead of Red Bull in the Constructors. And considering the way that Red Bull has been on the improvement track and the Ferrari has looked pretty mediocre recently, Ferrari's got to start thinking about they might be in danger of being not best of the rest, because that would be the trailing cars, but last of the best, because there's a pretty big gap between them and Williams for P4 and P5 in the Constructors Championship. So I think falling down to P4 would be a real bad result for them, especially considering how little Red Bull has been getting out of the second seat until recently. Now we'll start to work our way outside of the top 10, because that covers all 10-point scoring positions amongst those teams. Sauber is the next team on the list. And neither of the Saubers looked particularly handy around the streets. Wasn't a particularly good one. Neither of them making Q3 this week. Gabriel Bortoleto has been putting in performances that have been getting him into Q3 pretty well, but you know, even though he didn't make Q3, he still did make it one session further than Nico Hülkenberg. Nico obviously out in Q1. Gabriel made it into Q2. And once again, you know, continued to put in decent results compared to Nico Hülkenberg. Gabriel was P11, so just outside the points. But that being said, whilst he was only one position outside the points, he was over 30 seconds off the points. So the gulf between the point scorers this weekend and the non-point scorers was pretty big. But Bortoleto is still looking pretty decent. Nico Hülkenberg needs to figure some stuff out. It's been kind of an extended streak of him kind of losing out to his teammate. It's ironically, I think, has mostly started with the podium in Silverstone. So hopefully he can get back to performing like we know he can. He's one of the more sure-handed veterans in the sport. Haas, much like Sauber, has been seeing a trend of the rookie driver looking a bit stronger recently than the veteran driver. Oliver Bearman managed to qualify once again ahead of Esteban Ocon, qualify and finish. That being said, Ocon did pick up that DSQ in qualifying, which hurts him, but even his qualifying time, I believe, and I didn't get a chance to go look, I believe his qualifying time was behind that of Oliver Bearman. Haas is really struggling at the moment. They've been well outside the points. And it is kind of a trend we typically see with Haas. Early in the year, they come out the gate strong. They don't develop in quite the same way that other teams do. So they typically slide backwards throughout the season. The hope is that as this Toyota partnership, you know, gets its legs, obviously there's not so much they can do this year, but as this Toyota technical partnership gets its legs, that they'll start to develop better throughout the year. And I do think it's going to be necessary for them to kind of sort that out, because obviously you've got Cadillac waiting in the wings for 2026, and right now Haas is kind of the darling American team, but they're not going to be the only kids on the block next year. And Cadillac, you know, as much as F1 is all about bluster and making the sales pitch, from the interviews that I've seen, it does look like Cadillac is quite serious about spending the money and developing and, you know, trying to compete a little more compared to what the Haas model has been for a number of years. So the novelty of Haas being the American team kind of disappears if Cadillac is the one getting results and Haas isn't. Next up, we've got the Aston Martin team. Ooh, big lockup up front there. Which has just been struggling. I mean, Fernando managed to get the car into Q3, which is a pretty big result for the team. However, the true pace of that car revealed itself. They finished 15th and 17th. Fernando Alonso, in addition to the poor pace of the car, just has been on a run of pretty bad luck strategically as well. And that's definitely not helping out the pace of the car. I'm sure Alonso, along with many in that Aston Martin team, are just kind of, they're ready for 2026 to arrive, because 2025 has not been particularly kind to that outfit. And lastly speaking, another team that has 2025 has not been very kind to is the Alpine team. And both cars out in Q1 in a dismal weekend, both Gasly and Colapinto. Franco Colapinto nearly made Q2, but didn't. So coulda, shoulda, woulda, unfortunately. And the Alpines in the race ended up being the only cars to finish a lap down to the leaders, which definitely tough scenes for the Alpine crew. And I did see in the intervening week since the last race that it does look like Alpine is kind of throwing in the towel. They're not planning on bringing any more upgrades to this year's car. So they are another team that will be limping to the finish of 2025 on the way to 2026. And what incredible timing, pulling into the pits, and we are going to leave Baku and head and take a look at Singapore. Okay, welcome everybody to the Marina Bay circuit here in Singapore. We'll take a quick slow jaunt around the track to show it off. Modest run down to turn one, not a hugely long run, but enough to get a little overtaking action, usually on the first lap, about 250 meters down there. First complex of corners makes for a bit of a mess, a little left-handed jog, and then this right-hander. You'll see a lot of cars on the first lap having to take to the escape road on the outside, because people love to squash you over this right side if you've gotten the inside of turn one. Then you're into turn three, this tight little left-hander, and now you open up the throttle and head to this tricky little right-hander of turn four. This is going to be a very important corner because it sets up your run down the first DRS zone and probably your best overtaking opportunity on the circuit. So you come out of turn four, there is DRS already open, as you can see. There's this little right-handed kink, and shortly after you come out of this kink, there's going to be the braking zone for turn five. This is going to be one of your better overtaking opportunities. After this section, you're going to see a lot of single file, obviously lap one being the exception where anybody will throw it up any corner. But typically, unless you have a significant tire delta, which we'll talk strategy a little later, you're not going to see a ton of overtaking opportunity around the Marina Bay circuit. So we'll work our way through the middle sector here. Tricky little combination of corners. Very cool shot as you come over the bridge and into this hairpin, which the exit of this hairpin corner does set you up on another DRS zone, but it's not very long, and when you're exiting out of such a slow corner, you're going to get that kind of accordion effect where the front car gets to accelerate a little earlier, and this DRS zone just isn't really long enough to get overtaking done because you're already on the brakes here at this 100-meter board and into this right-hander. Now, we're headed to a section of the track that has changed over the last couple of years. Last few years, it's been this just little left-handed kink and run down towards the line. Before that, you would have this left-handed kink, but then you would break off to the right, and you can kind of see the lines on the track here. You would make this right-hand turn, go around this grandstand, and you would kind of do this right, two lefts, and then right, and it would put you back out because you would come out under the grandstand and the parking structure here. In fact, there's a little bit of the apex curbing still there. And then you would come out onto this section. Here, it's just a flat blast. I don't know that you'll see a lot of overtaking opportunity here. I'll have to check the map. I know some years the DRS zone is here, some it's not. I don't know if it is this year off the top of my head. But then you have these little right-left combination. And then a real tricky corner, this double left-hander at the end of the lap where you really throw the car in. You're not going to see drivers take as much of the curb as I do. The game lets you get away with it here, not so much in real life. But there's a lap of the Singapore circuit. We'll pick up the speed and talk a little bit about what we'll see this weekend as far as strategy goes. So Singapore, unlike Baku and unlike some of the other tracks that have had the C5 as the softest compound in previous years, they're not going to the C6. They are staying with the C3, C4, C5 combo, which is pretty soft overall. That being said, I think it's the right decision, because one thing we've noticed throughout the year is that the C6 has not really been what you'd want it to be out of a tire. It's been too fragile for use, really, as evidenced by, you know, the couple times we've had the C6. You've seen the medium make quite a few appearances in qualifying because the C6 would just overheat before even the end of the lap. The C5 seems to just about hit that last spot decently and give a good result there. However, Singapore has been a one-stop track for a while because it's so difficult to overtake. So it's been one of those drivers manage the pace. They're not pushing very hard at all throughout the race. So I do think the strategy will probably still go to a one-stop. Singapore is one of the tracks. There are a few tracks that have a narrower pit lane and therefore have a reduced pit lane speed limit. So that has often played a factor in the race strategy. 2024, 2025, 24 and 23 both, not 2025. We haven't driven the race here yet. Both of those races, the one stop was the preferred strategy. We saw a couple of two stops in 2023 for a couple of reasons. Number one is there was a safety car relatively early on, so everybody came in on lap 19 to go from the medium to the hard tire. And the other part was the gaps in the field were a fair bit bigger, and Lewis Hamilton had the opportunity to pit into free air for his second stop and try and chase back down and go for a better position in 2023. But all in all, Singapore has typically been a one-stop strategy kind of place. Now, and I found this today as I was doing my research, literally before recording this, they have announced today that the pit lane speed limit will be increased to the standard it is at other tracks for this year's race. What that accounts to is it means that drivers will spend roughly 6 seconds less time during the pit stop sequence than they would before. Now, does that 6 seconds make enough of a difference to swing towards a two-stop. I have my doubts. But, you know, the option appears to at least be there. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. But I would highly expect that Singapore is going to be most likely a one-stop strategy if it stays dry. Obviously, Singapore is a very warm and humid place. There's lots of moisture in the air, and the weather report does say that there's a pretty decent % chance of rain. And when Singapore gets rain, it gets interesting again. So we'll keep an eye on the weather. That could throw a wrench into not just the strategy, but just what we expect to see from the race. And when we talk about what we expect to see from the race, let's talk about kind of what's at stake. McLaren obviously needs a bounce-back weekend. Oscar Piastri especially could use it. But I'm sure Oscar would love to go to a nice wide-open permanent circuit to get his comfort back in, as opposed to another street circuit with walls all over the place where one mistake puts you in the wall again. So it's going to be kind of a confidence trial by fire for Oscar, I would say, this week. And, you know, Lando has improvements to make as well. As we work down, let's work down the constructors' order, at least as far as I can remember it. So now Mercedes second. The car has looked pretty good to drive for the drivers. Obviously, we've been to a couple of low downforce circuits. I think this is going to be a big opportunity to see how the Mercedes and just the drivers perform on a more high downforce circuit. But Mercedes is on a good run of form. Red Bull, well, I guess Ferrari if I'm going constructors. Ferrari has typically had pretty decent history at Singapore. I think their car currently leans okay in high downforce. It hasn't looked particularly great at the low downforce circuits so far. So maybe they'll be able to bring something. Leclerc has had some pretty great performances around the Singapore circuit, so I'm sure he's looking to revisit that feeling, but so has Lewis Hamilton. So both of their drivers have had some good times at Singapore and would look to get back to it. Red Bull, you know, they've really only had that new floor tested at low downforce tracks. This week, I think it'll be, if it's dry, I think it'll be a decent indicator of if that Red Bull car is the real deal for the rest of the season, or if they were being flattered by the tracks they were at. Williams, obviously they're going to be riding high on the podium result. Sure, they'd like to get both drivers back into that, into the top 10 again. Alex Albon will certainly be looking for a bounce back kind of day. Carlos Sainz, though, has some history around this circuit, including very famously purposefully keeping Lando Norris in his DRS in 2023, so that way Lewis couldn't get past Lando on the fresh tires and then come and attack Carlos. So strategic choice by Carlos Sainz. And keep in mind, that was when Sainz was in a Ferrari and Lando was obviously in a McLaren. So he was forcing somebody who was not his teammate to be a teammate. So and as far as the rest of the grid, I think just once you get into the Haas's, the Saubers, the Astons, the Alpines, everybody's just, you know, hoping for that good enough qualifying spot to be able to jump up in case there's any attrition at the top, or getting around this circuit a good enough qualifying spot that you can then defend your position and not let anybody by because of how difficult it is to overtake around here. But as always, or I will say, I've only been saying it for like a week now, if you have any questions, comments about this week, last week, or anything F1 at all, throw it in the comments. I'll respond. Whether it'll be in the next video or just directly on the comment itself. Depends on how I feel at the moment. But I will answer. And always, thank you so much for watching. I hope y'all have a fantastic one. And look forward to the race on Sunday. Y'all have a great one. Peace.